Modern JRPGs are in a really interesting place right now. We've got some huge cinematic blockbusters, old school inspired turn-based adventures, tactical games, full-blown remakes, and some of the most ambitious games the genre has ever produced. Basically, there's no better time to be a JRPG fan than right now. So today, I'm counting down my top 10 modern JRPGs. These aren't necessarily the most important or critically acclaimed games, but they're the ones that connected with me the most and kept me playing and more or less reminded me why I love this genre in the first place. So before we get to that, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, leave your thoughts and comments down below. Do you agree with my list? If not, what's your list? I would love to know. Let's get to the list with number 10, Final Fantasy VII Remake. This game had an almost impossible job. They had to revisit one of the most beloved games ever made, satisfy people who had been imagining this project for decades, and somehow avoid feeling like a prettier version of something we kind of already knew inside and out. What Square Enix delivered was far more ambitious than that, in my opinion. Midgar was transformed from the opening section of the original into a fully realized game, with some more time given to its characters, the whole sense of community, and more or less the people living beneath the plates. Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett are all just more human than ever, while the expanded cast gives this game a sense of lived in that wasn't possible back in 1997 on the original PlayStation 1 game. And the combat is one of the best attempts we've seen at merging classic Final Fantasy strategy with modern action. You can dodge, block, attack in real time, but the ATB system still ensures that you need to take some time and slow down, switch characters, and make some meaningful decisions. It does feel really flashy without completely abandoning that tactical identity of the series. Not every addition works perfectly here, and there are some moments where you can feel the story being a little bit stretched thin, but you know what? Remake proved that revisiting Final Fantasy VII could still be exciting, but more importantly, it laid the foundation for something much bigger, which we might get into later on. Number 9, Metaphor ReFantazio. This is a game that has taken me a long time to warm up to, but now that I've been maybe almost 2 years post credits, I really enjoyed it. This game takes a lot of the ideas that Atlus perfected through Persona and places them inside a completely new fantasy world. You still have calendar and relationships to develop and limited time to decide on how you spend each day, but the setting gives those familiar systems a different flavor almost. Instead of balancing school life and supernatural dungeons, you're traveling across a kingdom during a time of political turmoil, meeting people from different cultures and attempting to win the support of a divided population and try and earn your spot at the throne. It feels unmistakably like an Atlus RPG for sure, and if you've come from Persona games playing this, you might think that it is kind of Persona with swords and castles pasted over the top, but for me when I played it, I hadn't played a Persona game yet, and I enjoyed it for what it was. But what makes Metaphor work is how well it blends the story and all these progression systems together. The archetype system gives you an enormous amount of freedom when building your party, letting you shift between different combat roles while still developing their own identities. Battles are really fast and stylish, weaker enemies can be defeated without entering full turn-based combat, and of course the more tough encounters still require some careful thinking. It's a dense game for sure, and it's something that took me upwards of almost 70 hours to beat, and at times it can feel like a little much, but it's also maybe one of the most complete and ambitious original JRPGs of the modern era. Atlus could have played it safe, but Metaphor feels like a studio trying to create something as its next major pillar, and I can't wait to see what's in store for Metaphor 2. Number 8, Star Ocean: The Second Story R. This was one of my favorite games of the last few years, and this admittedly was the first Star Ocean game I'd ever played. This is the exact kind of remake that I wish more classic JRPGs received. It preserves the personality and structure of the original while completely transforming how it feels and looks and plays. The combination of pixel art, characters, and detailed 3D environments creates a visual style that feels so nostalgic without looking dated, and the newly arranged soundtrack adds so much more energy to an already memorable adventure. It certainly doesn't try to disguise the fact that this is an older game, but it does everything possible to make it more enjoyable for a modern audience. The real appeal, though, is just how much freedom this game gives you. You choose between two protagonists, recruit different party members depending on your decisions, and experiment with an almost absurd number of items to craft. Combat is super fast and always going to reward you, especially once you begin breaking enemies and unleashing these powerful attacks. There's a scrappy, unpredictable quality to the Second Story R that many modern games have kind of polished away, but you can really just lose yourself in this game, and it's one that you can play through again and again and again. It has so much replay value with the dual protagonists and the different branching story events that you have during your time playing this game. It's definitely an old school JRPG at heart, but this remake understands why that is worth celebrating. Number 7, Yakuza Like a Dragon. This could have been a complete disaster. The series pivoted from the long-term protagonist Kiryu, abandoned its established action combat format, and suddenly became a turn-based JRPG after years of doing like the free-for-all battle in the streets kind of thing. playing, and somehow it worked. Ichiban Kasuga is one of the most immediately likable protagonists in the genre. He's so energetic, optimistic, just gives a fresh perspective to the series without losing the obvious emotional weight and ridiculous humor that made Yakuza so distinctive. This was the first Yakuza game I've ever played, and admittedly I've gone back and binged the whole series now, and I've grown to really love them, but this is a really special game. And Ichiban isn't replacing Kiryu. I mean, he brings an entirely different kind of heart to the role. He's a really great contrast to Kiryu in that way. And the turn-based combat works so well because it's completely committed to Ichiban's persona without treating the genre like a joke. I mean, Ichiban sees the world through a lens of Dragon Quest. So ordinary street fights become exaggerated turn-based battles. It's so funny. And look, underneath all that comedy and hilarity is a really thoughtful party-based adventure about people who have been discarded away or overlooked by society. Your party members are struggling adults trying to rebuild their lives, and that feels really refreshing, and it proved that one of gaming's most established series could reinvent itself without losing what made it special in the first place. Number 6, Final Fantasy XVI. This is probably the least traditional JRPG on the list, but it's also one of the boldest. Rather than trying to satisfy every possible interpretation of what Final Fantasy should be, I gotta say, it fully committed to doing its own thing. This is a more mature, darker Final Fantasy game built around kingdoms and politics and people being exploited for the power they possess. And the main character, Clive, his journey is a lot more personal and grounded than the world-ending premise initially suggests. And props to Ben Starr for his performance. I met him last year and it was a real wonderful moment, and I thanked him for his amazing performance in this game, and it's wonderful. A masterclass in voice acting. But aside from that, I mean, the icon battles are among the most spectacular set pieces Square Enix has ever produced. The combat is very responsive and filled with abilities that allow you to shape Clive around your preferred style. Even if the RPG systems themselves are a little bit lighter than I would have liked, Final Fantasy XVI won't be everyone's idea of what a Final Fantasy game should look like, and I completely get that, don't get me wrong, but as a modern interpretation of the series, it is very emotional and very often breathtaking. I thought this was a really wonderful, complete story, and even when Final Fantasy moves away from tradition, I still feel like this game especially captured that familiar feeling of what's going on in a really massive and unforgettable way. I loved this game so much, I cried. Now hang on, before we get any further to number 5 in today's video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because almost like 80% of the people that watch my channel on the regular are not subscribed. So if you want to stay in touch for every review, retrospective, top 10 list, ranking video, all that good stuff, I would love to have you here. So anyway, let's get to number 5. Number 5, Trails in the Sky First Chapter. This was a game I was really nervous about playing. I got sent a review code and I said, sure, I'll check it out. And this ended up being my game of the year last year. This takes one of the most beloved, dare I say, slow burn JRPGs ever made and gives it the kind of modern presentation that can finally introduce it to a much larger audience. I've done a lot of research now since rolling credits on this, and there was so much in the original game that a lot of people love, such as the characters, the world building, and all the attention to detail. But this version, I can see the contrast of how it makes it even better. Towns are filled with so much personality, conversations evolve as the story progresses, and even some of the minor characters seem to have lives that continue whether you are paying attention to them or not. It's really funny. And at the center of everything are Estelle and Joshua, whose relationship gives the adventure its heart. Estelle is super funny and stubborn and sincere and almost impossible not to root for, while Joshua proves to be the more measured counterbalance that she needs. Their journey begins on a relatively smaller scale, and as things progress, you can kind of really just understand what makes these major developments later in the game feel so meaningful. The modernized combat here is wonderful. You still have some turn order manipulation here. You can still fight enemies on the overworld map without having to get into turn-based battles, so everything is incredibly smooth. And Trails in the Sky First Chapter proves that the most powerful thing that a game can do sometimes is let you fall in love with its people and the world, one conversation at a time. And this is a really great slow burn world building game, and I loved it so much. Number 4, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. This feels like the culmination of everything Monolith Soft had been building towards up until its release. The world is huge, beautiful, and filled with places that make you stop to simply take in the scale of what you're seeing. Noah, Mio, the rest of the party, they've spent their entire lives trapped in this endless cycle of war. Watching them slowly understand friendship, freedom, and the possibility of a life beyond fighting gives the story such a huge emotional foundation that it carries through even the most complicated things and story themes that this game has to offer. Having all these characters fighting together creates battles that you can look at as really chaotic, but there's an incredible amount of flexibility beneath the surface. You can switch classes, learn abilities from one another, and combine into these powerful Ouroboros forms. It gives you countless ways to experiment with your party. And more importantly, this game understands how to make a long game feel worthwhile. It's one of the most emotionally ambitious modern games I've ever played, and it's also very philosophical. Very few modern JRPGs have managed to balance such a massive world with such an intimate story. Number 3, Triangle Strategy. This is one of the best examples of a modern game taking inspiration from the past without just trying to recreate it. The HD 2D presentation here immediately calls back to all the classic tactical RPGs, but the political story and the decision-making systems give it an identity entirely its own. Serenoa, the main character, isn't traveling across the world collecting magical things or discovering that he's secretly destined to defeat an ancient god or whatever. He's trying to protect his people while being pulled between nations and competing ideals, and nearly every decision comes with consequences that can make you feel uncomfortable making them. That sense of compromise is exactly what makes this game so compelling. The people around Serenoa have their own values, and you can't just choose a dialogue option and expect everybody to follow you. You need to persuade your allies, understand what motivates them, and then sometimes you just got to accept what happens, because there are different endings to this game, and there's a lot of encouraged replay here because you're not always going to make the right choice. It took me 2 tries to get the perfect ending, and then of course I watched the rest of the stuff on YouTube, but it was a very deep thinking game for me. And the battles here, the tactical battles, are so wonderfully designed. There's elevation, positioning, environmental stuff, and character specific abilities that all play important roles. I like it a little bit better than Final Fantasy Tactics because I don't have to spend time thinking about jobs for each character. Every character feels useful because they bring something generally different to the battlefield, and this game takes its time. Believe me, but if you have the patience, this game is really going to develop into something thoughtful and arguably one of the most strongest tactical JRPGs Square Enix has ever published, or maybe even just any tactical game ever. I say that and I mean that sincerely. Number 2, Dragon Quest XI. Dragon Quest XI is proof that JRPGs do not need to completely reinvent the genre to feel modern. At its core, it's still a traditional adventure about a silent hero and a colorful cast of characters on a journey to save the world. And that is Dragon Quest at its heart. And this was the first Dragon Quest game that I ever played. And having played so many more games in the series now, it's just, you know, it's not reinventing the wheel here. It's just doing what makes these games special. You know, you got turn-based combat, the towns are familiar with familiar shops and churches to save your game, and the story really just embraces what this series has done so well. But Dragon Quest XI obviously understands that tradition can be a strength when just the fundamentals are as good as they are here. And the party, in my opinion, is one of the best in the series. Characters like Sylvando, Erek, Veronica, Serena, Rab, they all just have their own personality, and you're going to get emotionally attached to them for sure. This game is so charming and so comfy, but it also knows when to challenge that sense of safety. The world changes, things fall apart, and the characters in front of you are tested in some pretty challenging ways. And it's a huge game for sure, but you know, after 80 hours, it felt like something I was just settling into, and I just felt so relaxed by the time that I finally beat the true boss. I loved my experience. Again, this was my introduction to the series, and it showed me why these games have remained so beloved for so long. It really is a masterclass in why gaming traditions still matter and why you don't need to change everything all the time. So coming in at number 1, probably no surprise to anybody if you follow my channel, being the Final Fantasy VII fanboy that I am unapologetically, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is my number 1 modern JRPG. This game takes everything that Remake established and opens it up into one of the most ambitious JRPG worlds I've ever explored. After spending an entire game inside the walls of Midgar, stepping out into these enormous regions feels really liberating. Every area has its own vibe and sense of identity, but the real achievement is how the game makes traveling with the party feel like an adventure. The conversations, the smaller character moments, and the ridiculous detours that you can go on just gives this adventure and the party really more room to breathe, making these characters feel more human and just your relationships feel more deeper than ever, honestly. And Rebirth is also a celebration of almost everything Final Fantasy can be. It has these huge moments, funny comedic moments, memorable mini games, spectacular boss fights, and arguably one of the best combat systems that Square Enix has ever created, iterating even further on the Remake combat, which was amazing to begin with. Every character plays differently, and learning how to combine their strengths through synergy abilities makes battles so fun and engaging. And it's absolutely overflowing with ideas, sometimes to the point of excess. I know a lot of people kind of complained about the open world Ubisoftness of it, but I would rather see a game this ambitious take too many swings than play everything completely safe. This game respects the original without being trapped by it, and expands a familiar world in ways that I could have never expected. And for me, no other modern JRPG has matched its combination of character, spectacle, and creativity and pure adventure. And to me, is the most complete Final Fantasy experience I've had in a long time. So that's my list, and I'm sticking to it. I'm sure we'll have plenty of disagreements, and you know what? That's okay. I would love to hear your list. So please let me know down below in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And otherwise, we'll see you in another video very soon. Thanks for watching.